Welcome to ART,
the Adventure Race Training Podcast.
I'm Nick Herf.
And I'm Jason Magnus.
And with years of coaching experience and formal education in human performance, we've helped numerous athletes to achieve their goals and increase their self-efficacy. My background comes from formal graduate level education, coaching a variety of collegiate teams and professional endurance athletes. My athletes range from everyday racers to NCAA All-Americans and multiple world record holders.
And I'm the captain of Team Bend Racing. I've devoted the past 2.5 decades of my life to adventure racing, competing at the top level for over a decade. But I draw a lot of my coaching and training philosophy on my years as a top-level climbing, acrobatics, and highlining coach, essentially trying to minimize the learning curve on notoriously difficult sports. I've also coached a few world champions, so together, Nick and I have some great successes.
Ultimately, we're here to share our knowledge and expertise with the community to help you prepare for your next big race. Our goal is that these conversations provide valuable insights to elevate your adventure.
All right, let's get started.
Hey guys, welcome to the podcast. Jason and I are going to talk about all things recovery.
And what really works, because, we can all use more recovery, but the reality is there's a lot of things where we get good bang for our buck and a lot of things where it's just like our buck's going away.
Yeah, totally. Trying to clarify a little bit of what's going on.
Nick, I'm kind of bringing this to the podcast because I am one of those recovery junkies. I shouldn't say I am one of those recovery junkies. I live with a recovery junkie. And so I have become a recovery junkie in the sense that anytime there's a new fad or a new thing that pops up on the internet, it's like, oh, you got to do this. Or, like you see those ads of some CrossFit person like percussing themselves with one of those little things and then supposedly setting a new PR the next minute, kind of thing. So with social media, I think it's even more important for athletes to really understand what moves the needle in the right direction. That's really what this podcast is all about. So before we kind of get into our thoughts on what works and what doesn't, what do you have any fancy gadgets?
I do have a little percussion gun, foam roller, lacrosse ball, and a yoga mat.
The percussion gun is your fanciest, like that's your most electronic.
That is, yep. And we messed around with red light before.
Okay, good, because I have some questions about that. So what we have in our house is we have multiple percussion guns somewhere because we lose them all the time. We have not the Normatec boots, but like a knockoff version of the pneumatic compression boots. So we have a pair of those. They get used quite often. We have Mark Pro, which is kind of like a TENS unit, but it's like a more scientifically researched TENS unit. So I'll talk a little bit about that. We have, of course, I don't know, Chelsea would know, 10 foam rollers. We have like the psoas release thing, lacrosse balls, the yin yang, some minor red light therapy stuff. I mean, it just like we have a basket full of bands and
basket. Yeah, all the bands are in there.
All the bands and the yoga mat and all that kind of stuff. And we also have a sauna. That's been our newest addition. Like last year, we got a barrel sauna.
I love saunas.
I thought it was going to be like the worst purchase ever. And it is literally used daily in my household.
And the science with it is insane right now with endurance athletes.
Yes. And so we've been learning a lot about that. We have a old clawfoot bathtub that we put right next to it, which is filled with ice water. So a lot of times we do contrast therapy, which has, some science behind it. And also just, it's kind of like the tough man mental training mode right now. So I'll just lead it. Let's start with getting the reality out of the way that what is the best recovery tool? Nick, I'm going to see if you can answer this. What is the best recovery tool? And tool is in quotes, right? So
it's food and sleep by far.
I'm really glad you said that. We didn't have to start off on the wrong foot with, you telling me that foam roller was essential.
Yeah, food and sleep. And people mess that up. So if your nutrition's not dialed in, which the number one thing that people can fix is their diet. There was a study done, pretty big study, that showed that it was 90% of NCAA athletes were in a caloric deficit. And that's just because they're training like crazy and they're just not eating enough food. And so that creates a whole ton of issues. And then you probably have about 5% that are eating right and 5% that are probably eating too much.
In my mind, kind of the first three things that athletes should be looking, especially in this ultra endurance world, is like, yeah, their nutrition, their training volume, and then sleep. And, so if we look at recovery, it's that food and sleep. And both of those, I would argue that honestly, the easiest one for me or a lot of people to change is actually sleep. Like nutrition is a bit of a kind of pattern, and it's easier to kind of fall day to day because we're doing that several times a day, where most of us are sleeping once a day. So if we can find some system to commit to getting an hour more of sleep, like even if we're only getting 6 hours of sleep and we only go to 7 hours of sleep, which may not be enough to be ideal, but it still makes a huge difference. And just in general makes us feel more alert and cognitive and willing to train or do the diet thing. Does that make sense?
Yeah. And they feed into each other too, right? So if you're eating tons of sugary stuff before bed, unless you're super caloric deficit, it's not going to be beneficial. And then at the same time, if you're eating very well and healthy, you're also going to sleep better and recover better. And then do you want to touch on creatine with sleep?
Yeah. I mean, before we even get to the creatine with sleep, I'd say, do you have any protocols around like when you stop eating? I find there's a lot of benefit into having athletes and myself like kind of have a cutoff time.
Yeah, usually 2 to 3 hours before bed, depending on what you're eating, is a pretty good recommendation. And then the difference is, if you're like starving, eat something. If you're hungry, eat.
Yeah, for sure. But a lot of times I think that hunger comes because you stayed up too late looking at your computer or like doing nonsense stuff. And then you just kind of get that snacky vibe, right? When I get that snacky vibe, usually for me, it's like I should close my computer or stop consuming whatever, kind of worthless drivel I'm consuming and not eat and go to bed, right? For a lot of athletes, having a cutoff is a good thing. Like if your normal sleep time is 11, don't eat past 8:30. Just set that, and it's pretty easy to do.
Yeah, totally. And I think another aspect is caffeine, right? So caffeine can suppress hunger. And so you can have people that don't feel hungry, but they wake up, they have coffee in the morning, they don't eat as much. And then through the day, maybe they have 2 cups more or something scattered, and they haven't really had a huge meal, or they've had maybe one meal instead of like 3 or 4 or 5. And if you're training, your body will end up suppressing. Really, recovery is the main thing that it suppresses. And you're not going to recover as well. You're way more likely for injury, bone mineral density drops. I mean, tons of things happen, and you may not even notice just because you're used to it and you're taking enough caffeine that you're not even noticing you're hungry.
Well, and I feel like this is uncanny. I feel like you just looked into my soul, Nick, because I just got done with a backcountry ski today, and we drove up there. It's kind of crappy snow, but we were going for probably an hour, hour and a half, and I got 10 minutes in, and I had this like hollow feeling, which I'm very familiar with, because what it meant is that because I have no kids, I didn't have to feed anybody breakfast. I got up, I went over to my teammate Dan's house, had a nice latte, hung out, did some map work on the Magnificent, had another coffee. And before long, it's 1:00 in the afternoon. I'm skiing in the backcountry, and I've literally had 0 calories other than the milk in my coffee. And I'm just like, this is not smart. Even though it's an easy day, it's just a base day, it's just an hour and a half of backcountry skiing, but like it's something. And I just know that I'm not doing myself a service by doing that. And so that's, I think, a fairly common thing. You're like, oh yeah, I don't want to eat, but as an athlete, you do want to eat. You just want to be smart about it.
Exactly. I've done that same thing multiple times where, I have coffee in the morning or something and then I'm just not hungry and I don't even think about it because I'm going through the day. And the other thing is I feel that when I'm tracking my calories and I'm actually, in tune with it and I'm eating plenty, my training's better. And I actually wake up in the morning like super hungry. Like my body's putting it to work through the night.
Yeah. And that's a good, like if you wake up with that hunger, I think that's also a good balance. Dan, my teammate Dan, has often gone the other way where he gets hungry right before bed, eats a bunch, right? And now he's learned that because he has a tendency to overeat. Like he's not regularly getting too few calories. it really helps him to have that restriction. And yeah, the caffeine thing is huge because we're all like, coffee addicts in general. Not everybody, but it is a good thing to remember to balance that. Because oftentimes, if I do actually eat after my first cup of coffee, um, then I'll be less likely to just end up having 4 cups of coffee before I do anything, right? And this is more important for women, I think. But as we get older too, there's a fair amount of evidence that says even for coffee drinkers, right? It's a really good idea, especially for athletes, to have food before coffee. And that can be a protein shake. That can be something that starts your metabolism on the right track. Not a lot of sugar, but so she'll wake up and it's made a tremendous impact in her energy levels. She'll have a, 25, 30 gram super simple protein shake, sometimes just 10 or 15 minutes before she starts her coffee. And she's really, the premenopausal and all that stuff as she ages, that's such an important hormone regulator for women. So she's had this huge shift in her ability to train early in the morning, her ability to just have an even mood throughout the day and just feel really effective by just making sure she has food in her system before she starts the caffeine train.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. I do the same thing. I do a little protein thing in the morning. It's just simple, right?
It is, and it can be super simple. Okay, so you asked about creatine earlier. So let's. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, creatine with sleep.
Yep. What are your thoughts?
Tons of research. Obviously, it's the most researched supplement that's been out for years, and more research lately has been coming in for cognitive benefits, even for non-athletes, which is super high efficacy. Essentially, your brain uses it as another fuel source for sleep. So increasing REM sleep and all those is significantly higher when you take creatine. And so I messed with it, right? So I messed with the whole magnesium stuff. Didn't do anything for me, right?
Yeah, the magnesium citrate, yeah.
Yeah. Didn't do anything for me. Between the data as well as subjective. But creatine, after those came out for a bit, started trying it. Man, my sleep was so much better. Just dreaming better, deeper sleep, less waking up. I mean, all the stats were just significantly higher. And so that's something that both through the, empirical evidence and the research, as well as just through my subjective, it worked really well for me.
Yeah. And I think, I'm sure we'll talk more about creatine on the podcast as well, because it is really one of those supplements that is a no-brainer for almost everybody out there, right?
Yeah.
Especially athletes. And the cool thing with creatine is I remember first encountering it 30 years ago when I was more in my bodybuilding phase. And there was these loading phases and specificity about when you took it and all this stuff, but most of that has been shown to not really matter. Just, it's very similar to that idea that you got to take a massive amount of protein or whatever within 15 or 20 minutes of your workout. There's, at least what I've read, there's really, if you're getting good nutrition, right? It's far less specific about taking it within this 15-minute window, right? You want it on board, you want it consistent, and then your body knows when to use it. So it's not like as an athlete, you should be like, oh, I missed my 20 minutes after workout to have, you should have food. You shouldn't, if you're hungry, you should be eating. But really just having good protein profile through the day, creatine, your essential amino acids, that kind of thing. And being consistent with that is more important than the actual timing. Does that make sense?
Correct. What they've shown even in studies is with the muscle protein synthesis, the more you have in a single time, the longer that muscle protein synthesis is going to stay active. So, that window doesn't really work because, that 15-minute window isn't as important because by the time protein actually gets to your body, into the muscles and is digesting, it's a long time after that window anyway. In general, the research is showing is the more protein you do, the better. And they've done wild studies. So typically your typical athlete, the daily recommendation for years has been 1.1 grams per kilogram of body weight. They've done studies at 2.2, then 3.3, then 4.4. And I think the 3.3 was a 6-month-long study with a bunch of people. They did crossover, all kinds of stuff. And they found significant increases, obviously, in muscle protein synthesis and bone mineral density and whatnot. However, they showed zero impact on liver, kidney function at all. And what you see is previously, in the late 90s, early 2000s, the issues with creatine, same thing with protein, was if you have way too much, it can damage your kidneys. And the reason was that you would see an increase in creatine kinase in the urine, which is a natural byproduct of taking creatine. And also it's just a natural product in meat. So if you have too much, you urinate it out. That's also a marker for kidney failure and organ failure because those are proteins, they're meat essentially. And when they break down, there's going to be those products in the urine. And so they used to think like, well, if we're seeing this, that therefore could mean that we're seeing organ failure from too much. The reality is it's not true. And they've now proven that. And they're seeing that the more you eat, the better. And then as you age, your threshold for the amount of protein you need to take to hit that leucine threshold for it to actually repair the body increases with age. Meaning that as you age, you need to eat more protein to have the same effect of it actually repairing the muscles. And typically that's between, if you're younger, 20 to 25 grams. As you're getting older, it's going to be 25 to 30, 35 grams. And in general, you can eat as much as you want. So really just keep eating a bunch of protein. And it will have, the other thing all the studies have shown was, as long as you're eating, lean protein, healthy proteins, you're not going to have any significant increase in non-lean body mass, right? So you're not going to put on any body fat through eating protein.
And, the reality is, if you look at the general population trend as we get older, there tends to be this kind of period as we learn about nutrition and our athletes where we get into this fixation with protein. And then when they pull the more aging athlete, like that kind of goes away because you kind of get more mature and you think, there were these fads, but then often you get these aging athletes that need more protein that are now consuming less protein than they did when they were, 35, 40, 45, right? When they get into their 50s and 60s. So I think it's even more important. And that's where as well, the supplementation with the creatine and I'm also big into H&B. Those two things with the adequate protein and the adequate sleep are, those kind of can really let people that are athletes perform better, healthier, and longer, and just more effectively. I'm really all about, as I get older, especially because I'm living this. You're still in your 30s. You're like a little baby. How old are you? 35 now?
35, yep.
35. Yeah, that's and so for me, these things make a big, big difference. And I actually feel them, and I'm able to look at the metrics from the past 5 years, and when I end up somewhere and I go off of creatine and H&B and don't really pay attention to my diet, it's pretty quick for me to have a 5-10% backslide in my performance, which is significant. So I'm glad we're both on board with the creatine. There's really very few downsides. There's a little bit of weight gain with extra water and stuff like that. What I have found through experimentation is I've been using the creatine HCl. I don't know if you've tried that.
Yep, I have.
And I've had less of that. And because you basically taking less, it's more bioavailable. So that's an option if people are worried about the weight gain, but it's really just the water.
Yeah, exactly. And the weight gain isn't significant. You're looking at 1 to 2 pounds for most athletes, but the power and recovery and all the output you get's more. And the way it works, it's similar to carbohydrates, right? So if you eat carbohydrates before a race or in general, for it to store in the muscles as glycogen, it's 1 molecule of glycogen requires 4 molecules of water to bond to it, right? Well, it's the same thing with creatine, essentially. Creatine is stored locally in the muscles, just like your glycogen, and it takes some water molecules to attach to it. And then when you use it, those water molecules just get kind of digested out. The other part is you're only really seeing a 5 to 10% increase in the amount of creatine in the muscles by supplementing. So it's naturally occurring. It's already there. It's an energy system for explosive energy. And when you supplement with it, 5 to 10%, or sorry, 5 to 20. And the 20% is really for vegetarians because creatine's animal-based. It's an animal-based compound. And so, if you're already eating meat, protein, and all that, you're only seeing tiny increases in it as far as what your body's already naturally storing.
So bottom line, people, make sure you're getting enough sleep. Like if you're not getting your 8 hours, and 8 hours is a rough number. Like it's not, Garmin will tell you one thing. Like my Garmin sleep coach sometimes says, "Ooh, you only need 7 hours and 40 minutes." But like if you're not getting 8 hours of sleep, if you're not really thinking about your nutrition intake, especially when we're talking about protein here, then those are two things to start with. Like really focus on that nutrition, and also like I'm all for people experimenting with all the fad, the keto, blah, blah, all that stuff. But the reality is, if you're an endurance athlete, science supports you eating carbs. There have
Yes.
been a lot of craziness. I myself did the fun Tim Ferriss low carb or like, and I got ripped. It was like, I did it for a couple months and man, I looked so good, but my performance went down.
Exactly. And even now, the leading researchers, so Daniel Plews is probably the leading researcher in low carbohydrate athletes for endurance, right? He's from Auckland, previous Olympic triathlete, set the Kona age group record a few years ago. And he does a bunch with, I believe it's the New Zealand Institute of Sport in Auckland. And I did, I think, like 40 or 80 hours of continuing ed on different stuff through him. And he also was the leader on kind of pioneering a lot of the HRV studies with athletes as well prior. And really what the carbohydrate stuff is, if you're going to implement it, right, it's really a periodization, meaning there'll be specific times where you'll reduce it to try to increase the beta oxidation or the amount of fat your body's going to burn when you're exercising in order to try to raise that up a little bit to get like these small gains there, right? And so if you're an elite level athlete, that could be something, or for years you've been doing it. However, even those athletes are only doing it for periods of time. And then when it comes to the racing and prior to the race, they're dumping in tons of carbohydrates because your body can't perform without it. Now, other research from other researchers has shown that you're seeing significant impacts to sleep, recovery, intensity training, and also hormone profile. So you're seeing significant decreases in testosterone that can be as a result of it as well. And so even though you have some people like Killing Jornet and maybe certain athletes who have been kind of doing this diet naturally for over a decade, let's say, their bodies are a little more adapted to it. It's not going to be the same. However, for most athletes, it's something where the majority of your top endurance athletes around the world are eating tons of carbs and they're training super hard, and it fuels your training, your recovery, and your intensity, and it keeps you healthy. And the other part is, so even when you take what Daniel Plews has shown in some of his con eds and everything, is there's a difference between a ketogenic diet and low carbohydrate diet for endurance athletes. So the RDA, or the recommended daily allotment, is 130 grams of carbs per day is the minimum you should have for just general brain function and things for like a relatively sedentary person. So typically these low carbohydrate athletes are having 130 to 150, and they're trying to do a lot of healthy carbohydrates, so they're getting their fiber and all those things in. Keto is 60 grams or less. There is no athlete that I know of that is doing keto and training at an extremely high level for endurance and sustaining it. And the other part is females seem to struggle a lot more in the research with trying to do keto and different things, maybe 3 months, and then they go off a plateau. And that's because the metabolism between males and females is just different, right? We have different body structures and compositions, the way our bodies function and work. And so we aren't exactly sure on all of it. However, it really seems to impact females significantly more than it does males when it comes to even impacting menstrual cycle, and the hormone impact is significantly more. So carbs all the way.
I think that there was, the periods where carbs got a bad rap. And one of the things that I always think about is I have no problem training an athlete that's a vegan or decides they want to do the low carb. But the question I'm going to always ask them is like, why, and is it necessary? And if it's like an ethical concerns or those kind of things. But if you believe hype that like keto or low carb or vegan is better than the option, then you're not looking at the research, because there are
Correct.
a million athletes out there that don't care whether they eat carbs or meat or keto or vegan or whatever. They want to do what makes them the best athlete. And the vast majority of those athletes end up with an unrestricted diet that is smart nutritionally with macro micronutrients. Like that is how you become the best performer, extenuating circumstances aside, right? And so when there was that documentary that came out with like the vegan super athletes, and you're like, yeah, you can be a champion vegan athlete, but you're not a champion athlete because you were a vegan, right? And or because you're low carb. Like those are not the things that are pushing you into that elite category. You may be able to have genetics and elite and still function as an elite athlete with restrictions, but it's not because of the restrictions.
Correct. And if you're at such a pinnacle to where you're trying to get the gains from that, it's such a few elite athletes that would see any kind of real benefit from. And the way that, you generally would implement it, let's say you're like, hey, I am sold on, I want to try to increase my beta oxidation. I would just do 1 day a week of a fasted, easy zone 1 kind of training for not any more than an hour. You're coming off of sleeping, so your body's burnt through some of the reserves that it had. You're already in a low carb state. An hour super easy because your body doesn't want the stress of intervals or even really high zone 2. I wouldn't even do, and just go super light and easy, and your body's going to get some of that benefit of it, and you're not going to then significantly impact much. And then after the thing, you need to catch up on the calories. That would be the safest way I think you can implement it if you wanted to try to, if you're just sold on that concept, that's the easiest way to do it, just once a week on that. And I wouldn't do it for 2 weeks prior to a race.
And I would even say that our audience, most of the people that are racing 24 hours or longer, like every time they race, they're inadvertently doing that. Our body fat adapts during expedition races. It has to. We're calorie deficit, like we get better at burning fat throughout. And we're doing a crap ton of zone 1 in an adventure race. Like we're on a team. And so we went through that period and then we're like, no, we actually can't train as hard if we're stopping carbohydrates. And in these big expedition races, we end up fat adapted anyway, right? We're just burning everything. We're getting so good at finding fuel in our body in a 10-day race. And also you notice that in these long, whether it's an ultra run or whatever, people just lose their top end. And a part of that is because they do not have the glycogen reserves and the carbohydrates to burn. Like you race long enough and you no longer have, like you just see the zone 5 disappearing and then zone 4 disappearing and then zone 3 disappearing, where I'll feel like I'm working as hard as I can late stage on a big hill climb on my bike. And I'll look down at my heart rate and I'll expect it to be 170 and it's like 135. And I'm like, oh, good, this is where I'm at. When Chelsea did her 24-hour mountain bike world champion win, it was really cool to look at the data of how the heart rate ceiling just dropped, because like your body is not replacing glycogen after some point. And see how that ceiling just lowers and lowers. It reminds me of the trash compactor in Star Wars when they're trapped in the trash compactor and just getting smaller and smaller. Yeah, so it's a cool conversation because there's still a lot of people out there that I meet that are athletes that think of carb as the enemy, and not necessarily it's that dichotomy of like looking good and feeling lean and like carbs being this evil thing that we want to avoid. It's still out there in the common kind of culture. But then as an athlete, like there's a reason that right now in the pinnacle of the sport, like we talked about the tour a lot, like those people are being paid millions and millions and millions of dollars to do everything it takes to win. But like they are all about the carbs.
Totally. And you're seeing how more and more athletes, a lot in running and ultra running, a little bit in triathlon, the amount of carbohydrates that they're eating is just insane. So their per hour has gone up to like over 100 grams per hour in a lot of these athletes. And you're seeing interesting trends. Like we're going to see, I think, the next year and a half shake out in our protocols. However, right now it seems to be that between super shoes, people are running faster, heat training, as well as, a variety of other little things. But carbohydrates are like one of the biggest things the last 2 years is just super high carbohydrate intake. And you can do that because there used to be the theory that the intestinal lining could only actually absorb there's alpha and beta receptors so much, and there's a rate. And we're seeing that's not actually happening. We're seeing that as you're eating more and more of these faster than what the rate of absorption used to be thought of, you're seeing it actually having huge impacts on people. And once in a while, you've seen athletes just completely crash from it. However, it could be other mechanisms that are at play, such as they were just going so hard and other mechanisms of failure. But you're seeing a lot of athletes that are setting huge, PRs on big courses. David Roche, who coaches me, he set the Leadville record for the Leadville 100, the ultra. And then he just missed the PR at Javelina same year by, I think, 2 minutes, and he still won the race. And it was just super high carbohydrates. And you're seeing that kind of across the trend is more and more. And so part of that is training the gut to handle it. So you'll get people that'll eat too much and they get sick, right? And that happens, and we've all been there. You can train your gut over time to handle more and more food and to kind of get that sloshiness and get used to it, whether it's neurological sensors or what happens, we're not too sure. But in those that are practicing it, there's definitely a aspect of training the gut to handle higher calories.
Okay, so before we get down the high carb rabbit hole, back to let's step back to recovery toys, right?
Real quick, for people for sleep, what are some keys that they can do for healthy sleep?
Oh, sleep. Okay, easy one is for me having a sleep ritual is super beneficial. This takes a little while to build up. Chelsea's is like she puts those little foam earplugs in. She has an eye mask, and she, reads and lays in bed. That gets her ready, right? For me, a lot of times I have to close my computer, stop that. I need a big glass of water before I go to bed. So, because I don't hydrate as much as I should. Sometimes I'll take a walk around the block if I've been staring at my computer too much. And then I do a tiny bit of light stretching, even 1 or 2 minutes. So having some sort of a protocol that is important. Patterning is important with sleep, right? And this can go a long way towards your adventure racing sleep too. If you have a mini pattern that you can do a piece of out there. So I think that's a big one. We already talked about the not eating, like being pretty well digested before you go to sleep. I think is a great one. What are yours?
So eye mask and earplugs, and then a cooler temperature is usually better.
Yeah, cooler
So,
temperature. Great.
research usually is around like 65 degrees Fahrenheit or so. I like it even colder, and I sleep a lot better. And then trying to avoid, light before bed, which is kind of hard with the social media and TVs, all that kind of stuff. I'm always kind of busy tinkering with things, but yeah, those are kind of the big protocols. And then another one's avoiding showers too close to bed. Your body temperature can offset kind of a bit what you're doing. If you do it, 2 hours before bed and it helps you relax and that kind of thing, that's beneficial. If you're doing it 30 minutes before climbing into bed, your body temperature is usually elevated from hot water, and that can kind of throw it off a bit.
At our house, we're really good about starting to dim the lights. Once it gets
Ooh.
dark, and like by about 8 o'clock, we've got lights on dimmers, and like Chelsea just goes through and keeps it like it's enough light that you could do stuff and if you're cleaning up or whatever, but it's much lower than when it's on. The other thing that I suggest to people and should do myself more is if I lay down to go to bed and my mind is really active, right? Because I'm like thinking about things, or I work too long. I won't lay there for too long before I'll get up and like just take a little walk around the house, or we have like a little tiny block that just because what I don't want to do is make the pattern of laying in bed and thinking. Does that make sense? If you start thinking as soon as you lay down in bed, and then you're thinking through all the tasks you have to do that day, like get up, go write them down, and then go back to bed, right?
Yep. A dump pad.
Exactly. Dump it. Yeah. So those can be really helpful. And keeping a sleep journal. If you're wondering if your sleep is good as you're an athlete and you're training for things, keep a sleep journal. If you don't have a Garmin that's telling you, how much you sleep every night, just put a little pad somewhere on your fridge or something, and just like write down, when you're going to bed, how you felt. And so you start to see what things make a difference and makes the single biggest impact on our recovery. That and nutrition, right?
Exactly. Research has shown that how you feel when you wake up is not a reliable indicator of how you actually slept. So using metrics, through all the smartwatches we have are really good to use as well.
Yeah. Okay. Other than like sauna, let's just talk. Well, like there's a ton of things that move the needle a tiny bit if used correctly, but not in a huge way. Does that make sense?
Yeah. So sauna is the research is insane the last like 2 years on sauna for a performance enhancer for endurance athletes, but it doesn't really affect recovery much, if that makes sense.
Right. Yeah.
And so maybe should we dive into that now, or should we dive into that?
Yeah. I mean, we should talk at least a little bit about, but so I think of sauna as exactly that. It's not I don't consider a recovery tool. I mean, it's hard to how you define it because it definitely can increase your performance, which, but it's not part of the recovery process for us, right?
Correct.
It's
Yeah.
part of the performance process. Yeah. So what have you read about it?
Yeah. So the research has been, so it's kind of been a trend in a lot of the cycling communities for maybe 2, 3 years now. And then the research is catching up, which is kind of common. And what they're seeing is they're seeing essentially the same adaptations from sauna as you get from altitude, right? So you're seeing increases in red blood cell count and hemoglobin levels and blood plasma volume, so blood volume. So think of when you go into altitude, there's less oxygen there, and your body isn't able to absorb as much oxygen with each breath into the blood. And so your heart rate increases, and then over time, it releases kind of EPO, and it triggers your body to produce more red blood cells, and usually your blood volume increases as well. And so that's kind of where teams will go into altitude areas and live there. Training at altitude doesn't do nearly as much as living there. And they'll see these, hematocrit adaptations with the blood. And then when they go back to sea level or wherever, they're super compensated. And then after about 2 weeks, it goes back to baseline. So the study started off with, I think it was 3 by 50 minute sauna sessions. And these are for, elite level cyclists and athletes. And then they replicated it several times. And those were all showing increases in red blood cell count and hemoglobin and blood plasma volume, right? Then eventually somebody did one where they took, I believe it was a pro cycling team in France. I'm pretty sure it was a French study. They took a team at baseline, saw where they're at for all these markers, hematocrit markers, took them to altitude for 2 weeks for a camp and did everything there, retested them, saw all these things increased. Then they split them into two groups, the control group and the experimental group, and brought them back down to sea level. And they all did the same kind of training. And the control group went back to normal, and the experimental group wound up doing the sauna several times a week for multiple weeks. And they tested them, I think it was like 2 or 3 weeks later, and they found that group retained 95% of those adaptations that they had, whereas the other group returned back to normal. And so currently, there's kind of different views on what's going on. However, a recent study was looking more at breaking apart more of let's test significantly more frequency to see how things are going and if we can get insights into what's happening physiologically. And so what they found was kind of the theory that was going on for a while was that you would end up having dehydration. The dehydration reduces blood plasma volume. And when you get out, you drink a bunch of water and your body supercompensates and creates more of like essentially water in the blood. And that happens for a couple weeks, and usually around 5 weeks in or so, they then start to see a significant spike in red blood cell count. And now you have both increased volume and the red blood cell count, and with it, the hemoglobin that comes through. And they believe that it's going through because of the imbalance and homeostasis between the two parts of the blood. EPO is being released naturally through the kidney. And so that's theory going on. And the study saw a 3.8% and 5% increase in red blood cell count and hemoglobin and blood plasma volume in there. Super significant, right? And so it's pretty much at the point to where a lot of your top runners, top trail runners, and top cyclists are all doing some form of heat training, whether it's active or passive. So passive is sauna, hot tub, whatever. And a lot of the studies are using tub because they can control the temperature more. But it's significant improvement. And then if you're doing active, it's going to be more of actually, training in heat suits and all that stuff, which a lot of pros are doing. And then kind of the implementation, what you're seeing is if you go from a training session into a sauna directly or a hot tub or whatever, you need less time there to have the same stimulus is kind of the theory of it. So that's kind of where all that's going, but that's not recovery based. It's really, think of it as more like zone 1 training in a sense.
I mean, so I think my suggestion, because we've worked with a couple of different coaches on this, and, sauna is one of those things you can't just think, oh, I'm going to go get in the sauna one time, right? It's like most training. It has to be repetitive. And so, if you can do sauna 3 times a week, that's at least most of the studies I've read suggest that.
Mm-hmm.
And then for those of you that have a sauna or are on the fence about getting a sauna or asking for one for Christmas or whatever, I would say that, what we often do, and we've had a big effect leading up into races, is we will train, just like you said, on the bike trainer, finish a run at home. We'll turn the sauna on, and then we'll go straight into it, and that can be awesome, right? Um,
Hot
and
tubs can do the same thing.
yeah, hot tubs can do the same. And then, since we're talking also about like recovery, I think the science behind sauna recovery is not really there,
Correct.
but big asterisks there. I have a strong belief in the placebo effect, and I want to acknowledge that is probably, for all these devices we're about to talk about, including the sauna, the placebo effect is real, right? Like it's one of the
I
most
agree.
studied, and one of the things I like about the sauna and some of these other devices is the sauna is a time that you're taking for yourself. So do you have a sauna?
I do not. There's a gym nearby, though. I go probably about 4 times a week in sauna. Usually I try to pair it as best I can. About half of them are with some kind of training, and then I go straight into it. And the other half are just at some other point because I'm training outside or at home on the trainer. But I usually do about 25 minutes.
So we use it after training as that adaptation thing, but we also give ourselves that permission at the end of a long day to have that 40 minutes or whatever it is that we just feel like we're pampering ourselves. It's one of those things that for 40 minutes, it's my time to sit, to think, to relax, to stretch, whatever it is, right? So I don't want people to discount it as a recovery tool, but primarily if you have it, you should be using it as the other kind of thing, right? Because it's so effective.
Exactly. You have that parasympathetic relaxation part of the body that a lot of us who are training a lot, we're all very, I think, tight, wound up, maybe a little anxious. And getting that to just relax is huge.
Okay, what else? Like compression boots.
Yeah, so I've used them a bunch when I was at the university because they felt really good. They probably get some stuff moving around, especially when they go compressing and tight. I don't think the research supports it too much, but if you got them, use them. Why not? And I would foam roll though. More foam roll, I think, has the highest efficacy.
Okay. What about but like compression boots, I feel like same thing, they fall with that sauna, they feel good. I can
Mm-hmm.
sit in compression boots for an hour. Um and I think they're probably more effective in like if you've done a really hard day, you don't have that time to do a spin out, or like honestly the best thing is walking or getting on your bike and doing, an easy cycle. If you're trying to flush and get blood flow back into the muscles after a really hard workout or after a big stagnant day when been sitting on a plane, either way, um, you don't have time to get out. That's when I've really liked the compression boots.
Yeah, and especially if you got to watch TV with the kids at the end of the day because you need some kid time and stuff. Maybe throw them on and cuddle or whatever. It's a use of time that can be a little bit productive and make you feel good.
Yeah. The other one that I use a lot is the Mark Pro.
What's
Have
that?
you ever used one of those?
No, but maybe if I saw it, describe it.
The Mark Pro is it's a muscle stimulator. So it's like a TENS unit, but it is their marketing is that it's a cascading waveform. So instead of just like turning your muscles on and off, like
Mm.
basically pulsing, the decrease of the waveform is in like a little stair step thing. So it's not just turning the muscle on and off, it's making it seize or basically engage, contract, and then it's like slowly releasing it. So it's supposed to have better blood perfusion. I mean, it's basically supposed to do a similar thing to a compression boot, but it doesn't fatigue your muscle. Like, I was on a ski trip once, backcountry ski trip, and some guy had a TENS unit, like this little
Yeah.
this kind of pulse, and he got really drunk. And so we hooked it up to his abs, and left it on all night. He's passed
Just
out.
like the Bruce Lee movie.
Totally. Hooked it up to his abs. He was passed out all night. And when he woke up in the morning, he must have been on it for 6 hours. He was so sore, right? Like he couldn't laugh. Like he couldn't go skiing that day because his abs were just like, but again, those things as a training tool, like you're never going to turn into a top endurance athlete by just hooking yourself up to electrodes, despite what the magazine ads want you to think.
Yeah. And my understanding with TENS units is it's a lot more for pain through like the neurological than it is for anything else with the TENS. I'm not familiar with the Mark and
The cool thing with the Mark Pro that I really like is that you can change it's got that cascading waveform, so it doesn't fatigue the muscle. It more is like just a gentle flush. The other part is that you can change the hertz. So you can actually make the hertz go higher for pain, which is better for pain relief, nerve blocking. And we've used it like when we taught acrobatics for 10 years, we would get so many tweaks. Like we'd do some acrobatic move. I'd be carrying Chelsea over my head with one arm and like shoulder rotates and it's like a lot of pain. And I'd still have to perform or go on. And so those Mark Pro units, you can really just stick those pads on in a certain thing, run it for 20 minutes, and then basically be close to pain free. Again, that's not necessarily what you want to do. And it's not really helping with recovery. But again, it is that pain blocking, which can help, right?
Mhm.
That's again that placebo. It's harder to train or to do things if you're constantly guarding, right? I will say that for that, I did have a unique experience, which I kind of feel like I'm giving away a secret here. And again, I'm not sponsored by Mark Pro, but we've been using it for a long time. Then I have a small unit. When we did Eco Challenge back, this is how long I've been using 2019, right? I think it was
I don't
2019.
even know. A long time ago.
I took it with me, and in that race it was an expedition race, and we had the 4 stops. Like you had to stop in the camp, and your support person could be there and do your maps for you. And there were 2 longer stops, but every time we get to a camp, we'd lay down to sleep. And one time it was like 90 minutes. Sometimes it was 4 hours. I would hook myself up to the Mark Pro, put 2 on the bottom of the feet, 2 on the top of the hip flexors, and just run it while I slept at this super low hertz for 90 minutes to 4 hours, the whole time I was sleeping. And this is right after my hip surgery and everything. And I woke up, and every trekking leg, I felt like $1,000,000, and the rest of the team hated me. And I'm normally not the strongest trekker. So it's like, maybe it was placebo. Like, I really think that probably is what it was. But because I had this magic thing that I was putting on mid-race in these transition areas, I've never had a better trekking race than that race compared to the rest of my teammates who are all super strong. So in my head, it has solidified its place as this thing. But again, every time I look up scientific research, it doesn't really hold up. But that's the fascinating thing, right, with recovery. Part of
Placebo's
it
real.
is if you believe, then you're doing something positive for yourself, right? I mean, foam rolling, we know, like you've mentioned that, like foam rolling is the simple, everybody should have a foam roller, right? You got to use it because it doesn't do any good when it's just sitting in the corner, right? The kids like it because it's like you can just bash people with it. My kids love like a sword. But like how often, so now we're getting the simple effective foam rolling. How often do you do it?
I should do it every day. I probably do it about 4 times a week.
I mean, that's better than me. I'm more like 2 to 3 times a week, but it's still like any amount that's consistent, even if like Monday's your foam rolling day or twice a week, it's gonna generally make you like a little bit less sore and keep those muscles a little bit more mobile, which I think is great.
Yeah, and what it's really doing is it's aligning all the muscle fibers again as well and kind of working and flushing them out. But it aligns them without, if you were to stretching is kind of pulling them back straight, whereas the foam rolling is kind of more like ironing them out, if that makes
Yeah,
sense. And
yeah,
so if we're in a situation with stretching, you can overstretch to where you're going to be not as powerful or effective or transmit energy as fast when running because your muscle fibers are too apart. They don't connect enough to really have as much of it's called cross bridging, but they're not going to connect as much to pull as forcefully, right? With that said, you do need to stretch to a point to be mobile and not have impact. And if something feels tight, I would stretch it out. Um, but that foam rolling is going to be a lot more effective for working through the knots and working through really realigning everything and doing it in a way that's in general more beneficial for you.
yeah. I'm a big fan, and that's very similar to what you can do with a lacrosse ball. That can be a little bit more like trigger therapy or really smaller areas if you have a knot or if you have. But one of the things that I want to remind people of is foam rolling and lacrosse balls for me it's really easy to overuse them too. And
Okay.
I only speak of this because I have a wonderful athlete wife who basically is amazing, but she has a very addictive personality too. So if she thinks something is helping her, she often does it too much. Like you can get into this place where you're like you have this ache and you're like digging in lacrosse ball in, 8 hours a day, like every second you get. And so you can easily have an injury that you're trying to rehab or help with foam rolling or lacrosse balls, and you can almost make it worse, right? There's a point where
Yes.
foam rolling needs to be consistent, and I don't want to say gentle, but like 10 minutes foam rolling, keep that consistent, but you don't need to be on it for an hour, right? And so so I think that's one of those habits that you want to bring to your practice or to your athleticism and make it a habit rather than a solution to any particular problem.
Exactly. Yeah. 100%. With those injuries, if you're re-aggravating it,
Yeah,
it's usually not good.
right.
Whereas, you want to strengthen it without too much re-aggravating it. And it's a little outside my scope and our scope, it's more the physical therapist realm. But yeah, you can definitely re-injure it over and over, even micro trauma in a way that's not beneficial.
Yeah. So I think that just reminding people that those lacrosse balls and foam roller stuff, that is a recovery tool. And recovery is not about fixing a problem. It's about, this maintenance and making the training that you're doing more effective. Right. And that brings me to the one that we both have is the percussion gun.
Yes,
I'm
I love
I'm
it.
gonna I'm gonna put that though as a recovery tool squarely in the placebo realm. We may disagree, but I
Yeah, we
love
do.
it. But do you think it is like an actually beneficial recovery tool?
For me, it is. And I am actually, my body responds super well to percussion with just relaxing the muscle.
Okay.
So if I foam roll my quads, right, like my vastus lateralis, my outside quad muscle, that's just my spot that's always tight, right? I can get massages and they'll spend 45 minutes on it and it just doesn't relax. Use one of those guns, it within like a minute and a half, it just loosens and lets go. So to the point to where if I get a massage, I literally bring it and was like, hey, let me do this real quick. And it loosens up. And, I was using a therapist for a while consistently. And it was the point to where she had this big one and she would just put it on and it would just relax it. And then it would work, right? So for me, I'm just a responder. And a lot of it's, I think, the nervous system, right? Something with the percussion in the nervous system just gets the muscle to relax for me. And so for that part, it's more of I'm trying to reset the muscle and kind of work more that way. When it comes to, actually healing or repairing the muscle itself or helping with blood flow, any of that, definitely not. But for me, it works really well on just getting the muscles to relax.
Cool. Um, yeah, and like there's a piece of me that would have the argument that your body is well adapted to the placebo effect with the percussion. But
Could be.
regardless, like that's one of the a lot of the research that I've been reading recently is pretty fascinating because you mentioned massage, right?
Hmm.
And massage is one of those that is so contested on either side. And huge apologies to any of our listeners that are massage therapists out there. But like I have not found a bunch of convincing science that says athletes should get massages regularly. Like I used to get them a lot. They feel really good. And again, anything that feels good that you're taking time to do is probably making you want to train more and all those sorts of things. But for me, I think a lot of times we have this sense that I think the problem with a massage versus some of these other things that we've talked about that you can self implement is it tends to not be as consistent, right?
Yes,
And
correct.
recovery is all about consistency. So I really like the influx in the recovery space of these tools that whether they're pseudoscience or real science that you can control and make a part of your pattern, right? To me, that is a huge part about you should be having a question with yourself as an athlete, like, what is my training protocol? But you should also be having that question, what is my recovery protocol?
And with massages, it can be overdone. I've had
Yeah.
them before where I came out more messed up for a few days than I went in. I look at it as more of a investment in injury prevention from time to time
Hmm.
when I feel like my body needs it, and being cautious with it for sure.
Yeah. And I think of it as I'm more apt. I used to get these really deep massages, and now I'm more apt to have a better experience if I get like one of those kind of touchy feely Swedish massages that just feels really good.
Mm.
I just get 45 minutes of somebody, you know, rubbing me in a nice way, and you're just like, oh, this, and with nice music and tea at the end of it or whatever. Yeah, so I think I think a lot of it for me with when I talk to people about recovery is that it's super important. We can look at, just like with anything, we can look and say, oh, there's all these things I should be doing. But what I would tell people listening to this podcast is like, okay, first look at your sleep and your nutrition. Like make a change there, or something that can be consistent. It can be small, like start taking creatine, just start upping your protein, one extra protein shake a day, see where that leaves you, 1 extra hour of sleep. And then think about all these options that are recovery, and start with one and just be consistent with it. Right?
Mhm.
Like maybe it is just that sauna time. Maybe it is the foam rolling 3 times a week, but get something consistent so you are actually planning your recovery just like you plan your training, or saving that time. Because as an athlete, I know it's so easy to think this is my training time and I'm going to train the whole time. I'm sure so many of our listeners do that, where you're just like, I've got an hour and a half, boom, I'm on the bike for 90 minutes. And then you walk right into whatever the next stress is in your day. um, and don't make any time, and then you're not sleeping enough or whatever. So if you can start to make, especially as you get older, and this applies to people your age, Nick, but especially when you get my age, right? You will not adapt as well to the training that you're doing unless you are also prioritizing and have a system of recovery.
Definitely. And I would say with the consistency, even just commit to 2 minutes, right? And if you commit to 2 minutes when you go to do it, it's so small, but that 2 minutes is like 700 minutes a year. You know what I mean? And that's significant. And so even just 2 minutes, whatever you think your body needs, do it. And then often you'll see that 2 minutes will turn into 5 or 6 or 7 or whatever.
That is brilliant, because I think a lot of people think that those things don't happen. But if you were to say like, hey, I'm about to give you 700 more minutes this year that you spent on yourself, and then made your training more effective. That's pretty cool. I can give you the first 30 seconds of that. So when you finish training, drink a big glass of water. Maybe that's only 15 seconds, right? Obviously, like when we're doing a big event, hydration becomes more in our mindset. But often when we train, it's the same thing. It's that nutrition, sleep. Like we run out of water on the bike, and so we just like keep biking, or we finish our thing. So for me personally, this made a huge difference. It's just like the first thing I do when I finish a training thing is I walk out of wherever I've been or walk home and get a big glass of water. And then that starts me on this path of like, hey, what am I doing for myself for the next? I love this 2 minutes thing, man. That's such a simple thing. 700 minutes a year, dude. Love it.
Yeah. And for real, if you do 2 minutes and you're like, I don't want to do anymore, don't do anymore. It works. And, one last thing I want to hit is ice, because there's a lot of discrepancy in ice and, implementing it in different ways. So if you want, I can deep dive into that.
I mean, I don't know. Do we agree on ice?
So there's two ways for ice, right? One is going to be recovery, the other is injury. And in those, there's kind of two different views on it or implementation of it.
Okay. Yeah. I'm curious. This is great. Okay. So the cool thing is, podcast listeners, we have not prepped this. We might be starting the biggest podcast fight in history, but go ahead.
Okay. So we'll do injury first. So
Okay.
injury wise, there's in the field of like sports medicine, there's people on both camps of it as to whether you use ice or not right after an injury. So if you use it, it's going to help with the inflammation and kind of get that down. The counter argument is, well, all the inflammation is what the body's naturally doing, and it's going to help protect it. It's the body's natural way to repair. And so that we can kind of shelf unless you have any comments on that.
No. Let's shelf that. I don't want to. Let's not go the injury route. Let's go recovery.
Yep. So recovery route, right? You go first and then I'll go because I've dug in.
No.
Okay. So for recovery, right, what they've shown is if you do the ice within an hour of an exercise, it stunts the stimulus on the cellular levels for stimulating that supercompensation phase, right? So the idea is that it kind of stunts the inflammation, and that inflammation is the trigger that really yields and signals to the body through all these different methods on how to resist and then ultimately have that extra recovery supercompensation to get stronger. And so the thought is if you do it, you may recover quicker. However, you are potentially hurting what that long term is, right? And so the way I used to use it with my athletes was, let's say I have a football team or any team in a preseason. They're doing 2-a-days for 2-3 weeks in a row, getting ready for the season. Well, at that point, we're not really caring about their fitness or super compensating. We're caring about them recovering as much, taking this insane amount of pounding, keeping the overall body and the inflammation down, and just trying to get them to be more fresh as we can and recover quickly so they can be on the field getting quality reps in the entire time. But in the off season, we need that stress. We need some of that, inflammation, especially at the cellular level and the muscles. So it signals the body to then compensate and grow stronger. And so that's kind of the difference in what that is where I see it. And then also, if you're doing something that's so over the top, like, I don't know, you're going to run a 100-miler or something, like at that point, your body's not going to have it's not healthy stress, it's distress, not eustress, right? And so at that point, let's get that ice on there, or even mid-race even, right? You're going to bed down. I think that's great.
Oh, in short, this is good. We can continue having this podcast. Everybody, this is not the last podcast episode. So basically, what you're saying, and I think this is a good general statement without getting too political, is like you're anti-ice. Not in all things, but like, and I'm making a joke there because ice is another word that means something else right now.
Oh, I see.
And as far as training, I agree. Like, I think ice has its place, but I would 100% agree with you that, the science shows that for structured training, ice is a detriment. So if you're getting out of your threshold training, you're like, oh, I'm sorry, I don't want to be sore, I'm going to go put ice on it. You're stunting that adaptation, right? Where I think it, just like what you said, can be super valuable is if you need to compete and know that you're going to compete better with less pain and less soreness, right? Ice can basically numb a lot of that away, right? You twist your ankle and need to go back out there, or you have or that's the injury side. But even in those 2 days, the times that I have used it, and this is very, very rare, if I'm really trying to increase a skill, it's like what you said with football, but like if I'm doing skill reps and they're hard and I'm getting sore and tired because of that, and I want to do it again. Like I used to ice my hands when I was climbing, right? Because like I just the fingertips would get sore and I wanted to do another session in forearms. Like I'm not trying to gain fitness because again, then it's repetition, muscle memory. I'm trying to really hone those things in, right? And then ice would help me have that second training later. But I think in general in the endurance world, which we're talking primarily the adventure racers, like I would say don't be icing after you train so you can train harder the next day. That's not going to help you. Right. If anything, go in the sauna. Right.
And if you're going to do a whole cold plunge thing, and, my understanding is there's research there with the heat shock proteins and health longevity type stuff. And the science isn't that great in some areas of it because it's like, well, if you have people doing that, they're probably doing other healthy things, But if that's your thing, separate when you're doing that to be on a completely different time of the day from your training.
Yeah. The great part about that is, and it's super applicable to adventure racing, it is the uncomfortability training, but it's not physiological recovery. And it's even, I think, harder and more effective if you're doing it not after training. Like if you're super hot and you just did a hard training thing and then you're getting into an ice bath, like you kind of are continuing with that aggressive training energy that lets that be easier. But for me, if it's like, if I'm comfortable sitting inside, my training's done, and it's like, and then I go take a cold shower or get into that cold plunge, that is the mental grit. That's where you guys train those kids. It's like, can you do this uncomfortable thing because you choose to, right? And that's like a willpower training, but it has nothing to do with like making my physiological training, more effective.
I love it. And there's that whole like endocrine concoction of catecholamines and that you get hit with after, like the epinephrine, and it does feel good when you're done.
I mean, I love like we do, and we do a lot of contrast stuff where we're going in and out of the sauna, but that's only because it also lets us stay in the sauna longer because like freaking 15 minutes in our sauna and you're just like melting. And I want longer sessions in there. So I also have done the research that if you want those longer sauna sessions, breaking it up with the 30-second cold plunge is fine. Because you're basically still getting that longer kind of adaptation from the sauna. I can't hang out in the sauna for 40 minutes.
Yeah. And a good way for people with the sauna is to wear your wrist device. Be careful, you don't want to break it. However, if you have the heartbeat on there, you don't want to drift over 120 really. Like 110 to 120 is usually a range. You don't want to go too high over 110, and you don't want to go into the 120s at all. In general, just for the heart, there can be complications with that. So that's kind of another litmus you can look at.
But it is cool that you're sitting in the sauna and your heart rate's going up because you're just like, wow, this is rad. I'm just like sitting here and getting like super low zone one,
Exactly. Yeah. And
yeah, hanging out.
yeah. And it's because you're sweating out, your blood plasma volume's dropping, and now your blood volume's dropping, and your heart has to beat faster to keep the same amount of oxygen going.
Okay. The funny thing is we set out to make this a 30-minute podcast and it was so fun. It's an hour. So I'm calling it, and then we got one more to record. So thanks, recovery.
Awesome.